And we are live on The Education Fix. We have a special, always have special guests. We have a really special guest that I know I've been following for a while, and Dr. Nunziato and Rich as well. We have Will Richardson here. Welcome, Rich and Anthony first, and welcome, Will. How are you?
I'm doing great. Thanks very much for having me. Really appreciate it.
Yeah, really appreciate you being on. So we'll start out with, I think a lot of people know who you are, but maybe a quick intro about yourself. And we're going to try and get into some of what you've written about, what we've talked about, sort of what's sticking in this post-COVID, what should stick, what will stick, what we hope will stick after this really traumatic period that we've all been through, both personally and professionally. So, yeah. Will, real quick intro, go ahead.
And so we'll be on this podcast for like 3 days, right?
Yes, that's exactly right. Yeah.
So I was a former high school educator for about 22 years, a supervisor of technology at a large school in New Jersey, but left that job to do writing, consulting, speaking. Have been very honored and privileged to have been to about 25 different countries around the world over the last 15 years or so. And my current iteration, I seem to kind of change things up every 2 or 3 years. My current iteration, which I think I'm going to stick with for a while because I'm finding it really interesting, is that I co-founded with Homa Tavangar the Big Questions Institute 2 years ago. And right now our work is to try to help people navigate this moment more than anything else. We didn't start that to do that. Obviously, the pandemic came upon us. And we had to adjust just like everyone else. But it's been, I think, a very interesting year of learning that all of us have done. And what we're trying to do is help people make connections between the learning that they've been doing in this moment and the learning that kids are doing in schools at this moment, which my sense is very different. We've been, doing some very big problem-based, inquiry-based types of, this has been a huge project that we've been trying to kind of solve over the last 14 months or so. And it's been profound, but learning in schools really hasn't changed that much. So we're trying to tease that out a little bit and, ask some big questions, as the name kind of suggests.
So I'd love to hear, Will, I think I know the answer to this, but you started this basically right before this Big Questions, into right before the pandemic hit. Yeah. Has it sort of escalated the questions that need to be asked? Has it hampered? Has it done both? Because it could hamper too, right? Because we have to do what's out in front of us and not worry about anything else, right? Yeah. How has that evolved? Like people actually questioning school, has it changed it? I know it has, but how has it changed it because of the pandemic?
There's a great quote that we use by Adrienne Marie Brown that goes, "Things are not getting worse, they're getting uncovered." And I think that's to, kind of exactly what's been happening in these last 14 months. And let's just be clear, right? It's not just the pandemic, it's the social and racial justice issues that have come up. It's the income inequity, which has kind of, again, been uncovered by what's happened. It's the looming climate change conversation that we're going to have to deal with, right? So it's all these things that have come together. And I think they have given more oxygen to these bigger questions. I think people are beginning to understand that we are in this existential moment, that things are, there's a lot of phrases for this, right? That it's a hinge moment, perhaps, in history, where if we can get down the road, I won't be there to read it, but when people write the books 30, 40, 50 years from now about these first couple of decades of the 21st century, that they're going to be looked at as a time when we made some huge decisions about the path forward, and we either got them wrong or we got them right. And, I think that's still up for debate, obviously. But I think, especially in schools, we were forced to confront a whole bunch of things that maybe we had been able to kind of, paper over for a long, long time, about what school is, how it works, what kids are actually learning, and what really matters in the context of our relationships and our work with children. And I think in that sense, at least, this has been somewhat of a good moment, because I think a lot of people are talking about them more often than not. Just really fast too. So we wrote this ebook that we released a couple months ago called 9 Big Questions Schools Must Ask If They Don't Want to Go Back to Normal, because normal wasn't that great to begin with, right? And I think that that's the kind of crucial moment that we're in right now, is that there is now, as we begin to open up a little bit and as things begin to get a little bit better, a lot of schools, a lot of educators want to go back to normal. A lot of educational leaders who we work with say that basically. They're exhausted. They just want to get back to normal. We want to suggest that that's not what you want to do at all. That what you want to do now is reinvent normal, and use this as a catalyst for that. It's really hard work, obviously, but I think in that respect, at least, this has been a catalyst for some bigger questions, bigger conversations. We'll see how they pan out, but.
It's all about the momentum, right? It's all about what momentum we choose to leverage. It's the momentum of the old or the momentum of the questions that have come up and what's been uncovered, right?
Yeah, and it's energy too, right? Yeah. I mean, like people are exhausted. I mean, I mean, look, changing schools, pandemic or no, is exhausting work, right? So, and you throw on all this, all these kinds of technical changes that we've had to make and try to figure out. I mean, everyone kind of admits that we've gone 5 years in 5 months when it comes to our use of technology in schools, and it's been really, really hard. So no one is discounting the fact that this has been a historic 14 months that we've lived through, and that the accompanying fatigue and emotion that that are with that are not to be discounted, right? But at some point, we're going to have to, I think, get to the core of these questions about our work with kids, because I think it's becoming pretty clear that much of what we're doing in schools right now is increasingly irrelevant for the world in which we live.
Yeah, I want to hear from Anthony and Rich as well. But I like every year in school, sort of like a marathon. This year it's been a marathon where at the finish line, they just keep running a little further down, and then the finish line keeps moving a little bit, and you don't really have an end to the marathon. And people are stumbling, thinking they're there, but they're actually not. Anthony, Rich, thoughts, questions?
Yeah, sure. I'll throw a question out. First of all, I can't agree with you more. This is a historic moment in education. Let's hope that COVID, to lack of a better term, have been a catalyst for disruption in education. You can't be in this profession and not be a perennial optimist. And but I also think that we need to focus on where the sources of opposition are going to be in terms of this transformation and this journey that I think you very well articulated. A lot of things have been uncovered. I think people do want to go back to normal, but where will be the great challenges for facing schools, school leadership, policymakers in terms of trying to transform education based on these excellent questions that you suggest?
So I think that's a great question, and my brain is kind of going to two different places, right? The first is that I don't think there are a lot of barriers to get people to talk about what's wrong with education, and I think what's wrong with education in schools, by the way, is a lack of common sense. The conditions that we create in schools do not comport to the conditions that really powerful learning requires, and we all know it. No one, if they started a school today, would start it with 45-minute periods and isolated curriculum chunks and age group kids and all of that stuff. And when you say to parents and community members and leaders and politicians and everyone else, and you ask them, how do you learn? And then compare it to how kids, they all go, yeah, you're right. It doesn't make any sense. I mean, we shouldn't be doing it this way. So it's not a question so much, when you challenge people as to how the system operates, most people kind of go, yeah, you're right. But where the challenge comes is that, when you're in between stories, and that's a phrase that we use a lot right now, which I think is apt for not just education, but for media, for business, for politics, for healthcare. All of us are kind of in this liminal moment where a lot of the old stuff is kind of breaking, and we're looking at it and we're going, this just doesn't work, but we don't know yet what this new thing is that we're creating. There's a real tendency, especially when you're working with children, to, I know it's not great, but look, we're not bad. We went through the system and, we're okay. And, that type of thing. And I think there's this inertia and this comfort, even though most people will look at it and go, yeah, it's not really great, that makes it very difficult for us to move to something different. It's like, don't experiment on my kid, right? And so I think that parents and kids too, children, by the way, when you come in and you say to them things like, look, we wouldn't say it this way, but let's say we couched it and we said, if you want to learn really powerfully, then we have to give you the agency to pursue things on your own terms, because that's the way that we learn most powerfully in our real lives, when we have choice, when we have freedom to pursue those things that we care about or need to know about or whatever else. So we're going to let you decide what you learn in school, and we're going to be there to support you. And a whole bunch of parents and kids will go, no. Don't change the rules on me like that. I've figured out how to be successful at school. And now you're telling me that I have to, you know what I mean? And so I think that's really where it gets very difficult for people to actually change. They intellectually can understand it, but emotionally and, practically, it becomes a very different beast. And so as much as you want to ask these big questions, one way that we kind of approach it is we come into schools and say to people, we're not going to change anything. We're not going to change anything, but we're going to talk. We're going to have some conversations, and we're going to get really clear on what is most important in schools. We're going to get really clear on what is learning. We're going to walk out of these conversations with a shared understanding of what learning is that all of us can at least tap into, and then use as a measure and say, is that what's happening in classrooms? And if it's not, then we can begin to figure out ways of moving toward that shared language that we have. And it's shared language, by the way, among kids, parents, teachers, leaders, everybody in the community. It's a culture that has changed. And then that drives that forward. So I think the barriers are more emotional and just, difficulty, as we all know, in general, with change. And especially when you're working with kids, it's like, ooh, let's not, let's be careful here on what we do, even though what we want to do aligns so much more naturally to the way that we just learn, the way that people learn. So,
well stated, well articulated.
Parents in general, they want comfortable. People in general want comfortable. They don't want to be uncomfortable. And whether it's a capacity that's lacking for change or just the desire for change that's lacking is or a combination of, right?
And just really fast too, we have set up so many things, and talking about the United States now and lots of places around the world, but in the US, we have set up so many aspects of our society to revolve around the school day and the school year.
Yes,
and
exactly.
So, all of a sudden now when parents are forced to stay home and educate their kids, they're like, whoa, I mean,
we don't want an inside look at this.
No. Right. And that's another thing too, that I think we have to be honest about it. Most of what parents want in terms of getting kids back into schools is childcare. They want them to get out of the house so they can go do their jobs and, and function in society the way that we've set it up. I totally get it. I totally understand that. But that's not really the function of schools. It shouldn't be. And, it's part of it. Yeah. But that shouldn't be the motivating factor for getting kids back into class.
Yeah, that's the primary driver, Will. Right? I mean, that is.
Yeah, fortunately it is. Yeah, unfortunately it is.
Yeah. Rich, thoughts? You're muted, Rich. We have to tell Rich once a podcast on mute. It's a tradition.
Well, the Zoom rule is now you have to spin around in your chair if you talk.
We put money in a jar, Will. We put money in the jar.
A quick statement, and it doesn't require a response unless you feel the need. My favorite word is catalyze, and I love that you use that word straight off. I love that word. And then actually, Al used another word, another C word that I embrace. We all embrace with great enthusiasm, so to speak, is the capacity word. I noticed, for example, there's a lot of money suddenly in everybody's coffee cans out of the federal government to rebuild. I'm not sure what the right word is, but to do something that they haven't done already or haven't thought about doing. And the few people whom we've spoken to briefly about what they mean to do to use the fund, the resources, to re-engineer what they do and maybe change expectations seems to be, in my view, this is just personal point of view, it seems pretty flat. It's not terribly imaginative or futures based, and that's bothersome to me. The other piece, though, I had noticed on your website that you do a lot of scenario planning with the schools with whom you work, and I was interested to know how the scenarios that groups are able to build, what you need to go through to get them to catalyze them to change the way they are thinking.
Well, I think that, you know, part of it is, again, kind of just getting to the foundation. Again, this is one of the reasons we wrote the 9 Questions book, because we felt like to move forward from this moment, you have to understand deeply where you are in this moment. And you have to kind of get to the core fundamentals of the work, right? So again, you know, we ask, what is sacred? What is learning? Why do we do these things? Why do we do 90-minute or 45-minute blocks? All those types of things, you know. Are we okay? Are we taking care of ourselves? Are we literate? Who has the power? Which is, you know, to interrogate power relationships is to begin a change process, right? Because if you don't take the time to fully understand what the power relationships are in your school community, then you're probably going to fall victim to the power relationships in your school community, right? I mean, Seymour Saracen is someone who's influenced my work a great deal, and he says there will be no change in schools until we understand how power interrelates, and until we get really clear on that. So I think that, you know, we have to get to a point in this moment, at least, where we are willing to kind of reflect on who are we now as people and institutions. What have we, you know, we've been through this tumultuous 14 months, but these are, again, things that have been kind of bubbling under the surface for a long, long time that have been pushed to the surface now. So who are we now? How have we changed, right? What did we used to believe? What do we believe that's different today? I think that's an interrogation that we do as communities again, right? So that we kind of get on the same page as to where we are in terms of our headspace. Then we ask those same questions about the institution, right? About who are we as schools? What's our value right now? What is our role? Facing the crises that we're facing in this moment, is it still important to teach 75% of the junk that we teach in school that kids basically forget as soon as the test is over, right? I mean, can we afford to keep doing that, given the moment that we're in right now, and given all of the things that all the problems that our kids are going to have to solve? You know, I mean, who are we? What's our value? And then when we get to that, we can say, all right, so where do we want to be aspirationally? You know, let's make some decisions about where we think the world is taking us, number one, but then how do we best respond to that as school communities? And then benchmark those against where we are right now, right? So that's you know, it's almost like gap analysis. I hate that question. I hate that phrase almost, but if you want to be here, okay, but you're here right now, then what do you have to do incrementally to move forward? I think one thing, and then I'll be quiet, but one thing that I think is really interesting in the many schools that I've worked with over the years is that basically they have aspirations, but they're not concrete enough to really then say, if you believe this and if you want this, but you're doing this, you know, look at the gap there and begin to fill it. There's not enough of that, you know. I mean, we make these very wordy, you know, mission and vision statements that you could probably do a Google search for and find, you know, 100 others just like it. And yet, when it comes to living that stuff, we really don't want to do that, because then we're forced to look at our practice and kind of go, oh yeah, that's not getting us toward where we want to go. You know, that's not something that we should continue to do. So anyway, that's a kind of a long answer. But
I like the gap analysis metaphor or analogy, but you're an English teacher. I always get mixed up on which one is which. But the phrase we use is, you know, what do you perceive your probable future to be, and what do you want your preferable future to be, and is there a hole between the two? And it takes a while for folks to recognize that, to come up with a new way to realize what's out in front of them.
Well, someone mentioned hope before, right? And another quote that we really like is the one from Mariam Kaba, who says, "Hope is a discipline, but it requires that we act." Right? It's not enough just to have hope. It's like you can hope for the best, but are you acting for the best? And I think again, that's where right now the urgency is for us to act. The urgency is for us to be willing, again, we call it fear, to be fearless, have fearless inquiry into the systems, practices the experiences that we provide for children, and then ask ourselves, are those the experiences that are going to best prepare them for what I think we all understand now is going to be a very uncertain kind of no normal future that they're going to have to be constantly adapting to. They're going to have to learn their way through their lives. There's no question about that. The knowledge that we try to impart to them in schools most of it is going to be lost or irrelevant within 5 years. And so the question becomes, do they have the skills, the literacies, and the dispositions to continually learn? And we've said this, well, we want them to be lifelong learners. Okay, great. But now we got to get serious about it. And if we're serious about it, that means that we focus on learning and not on content in schools, and that we really rethink the experience that we provide for children.
Yeah, well, you said, you actually took the words out of my mouth. I was going to mention, we've had a lot of epiphanies, right, throughout this process. Like, this has to change, this has to change, but none of it, I agree, that means anything without action behind that, and sustainable action too, not just one act and, hey, we'll buy some Chromebooks. That's not it, right? We have to have a sustainable plan so that these quote unquote epiphanies, these hopeful things that come up actually come to fruition, right? So that's a really poignant point you make, as you have many others. So I want to, we could talk about this for 3 days, as you mentioned. We'd love to have you back on again. Well, I just want to say, hey, thank you so much. I'll let Anthony, Rich, and you have the final word. Will, anything that you've spoken about, any of your books, feel free to link here. We recommend everything you do highly. So if the listeners out there, I know a lot of your, I think everything is on Amazon, Will, right? All of your stuff, they can reach out to you on your website as well.
Yeah, our site is bigquestions.institute. We've started a BQI community as well, which has over 800 people. And you can find a link to that off of our site as well. But yeah, this is hard work, and no one should go at it without knowing that it's very, very difficult. It's excruciatingly hard, and especially now, given the challenges that we're facing, that we need to really be focused and fearless in the work that we're doing. And just having said that, always leaving on a kind of feeling of optimism too, because there's lots of opportunity here. Yeah, and I think if we can take advantage of it, that our kids will benefit.
Final thoughts, Rich, Anthony.
First of all, I want to thank you, and always will remain a fan of your work and believe in what you do. And one of the things that I took away from listening to you, and just now talking about fearless and focused, and that is the implications for higher education, where we train leaders, where we train teachers, and academia could use a real good dose of integrating focused and fearlessness in their programs, because I think we contribute, and I'm saying this as a we, because I work in academia, we contribute too much to producing cogs in the wheel, and not those who are not only asking themselves the big question, but translating the answers to those questions into some action. And I think that there's a lot of implications too in your work for those of us in academia who start to rethink, well, how are we training our leaders, to lead in this next, in this next era of education, if we're really going to make changes from what we currently have. So kudos to you, to your work, and best, and keep on changing them.
Rich?
Well, first of all, I'm grateful to have met you and to have heard responded to and heard the great themes that you espouse. And I know we left a lot of things off because this is just one podcast. So I do appreciate it very much. Very grateful for it. And to piggyback off what Anthony said, the higher ed thing, I think, is a piece that sometimes doesn't get enough love in terms of understanding how they may be able to catalyze what it should be catalyzing in the first place. And the other thing that comes to mind is critical mass. Somewhere along the lines, people like yourselves and us, we hope to a lesser extent, will need to be able to contribute to a critical mass to tip this where it needs to go, whether it is where it needs to go. So again, I appreciate meeting you, and I appreciate your thoughts.
And Will, I know you had some final thoughts already. Any last words for the podcast?
No, because then we'll go 3 days. So thanks so much for having me. I really appreciate it.
Thank you, Will. Really appreciate you being on.